Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to the first episode that we're talking to you. I'm your co-host Jay Dominique, aka J Dot, and my co-host.
Your neighborhood oil head Prometheus.
And we're happy to be coming to you live and direct on Juneteenth. For those of you that aren't really privy and haven't did your homework on what Juneteenth is, I'm not going to do your work for you, but I will kind of touch bases on what the key aspects and tenets of what Juneteenth is, because it's a very, very important thing for us to recognize nationally as Americans. All right. So it's a celebration that is meant to commemorate what happened in 1865. The war was over, that being the Civil War. And believe it or not, word didn't travel fast. So there were still pockets of the southern United States that still didn't know the war was over and the South had surrendered. So in Galveston, Texas, Union troops rolled in and had to inform the last few people that had no knowledge that one, the war was over and the Union won. And then two, all black people had been emancipated during the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. But by 1865, we were already starting to talk about the 13th and the 14th Amendment being signed and ratified into the Constitution. So Juneteenth, June 19th is the day that the horses came in, cavalry troops, cannon, et cetera, infantry troops. And so we want to celebrate this day because this is putting a close to a very, very bloody, very, very terrible, and very, very dark chapter in U.S. history. That is chattel slavery. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that people get the word that this is just not some cliche thing. This is not a Cinco de Mayo type of thing or some other little ode to an ethnic group. This is actually American history. This is something that, if you will, think of it as a long distance cousin to the Fourth of July, because Fourth of July in 1776 is what set us out on this pathway to becoming a nation of free peoples. And Juneteenth was the commemoration of that, and it was the finality of, as I said, a very bloody and tragic time and era in U.S. history. So with that, I'm gonna kick it back to my guy Pro.
Hey, so what's happening is that currently the most loyal bloc of the Democratic Party is the black vote. But anybody familiar with history knows it was the Grand Old Party that freed the slaves. And you'll hear that a lot on talking points on the right, where they'll say, well, with Republicans were the party that freed the slaves. And we all know that. But there's some historical contextions that happened from the time of about Reconstruction to roughly 1970, if not longer, that made that saw the reversal in the party's primary demographic. So, how did we become Democrats? It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen because of one person, but it's a process. And I think if you understand the process and you recognize the processes, you'll be able to appreciate the process, but you'll also be able to appreciate why, when you talk about people saying the Democrat Party takes the black vote for granted or the Republican Party doesn't reach out to the black vote, you'll be able to understand the why behind it, because that's more important than talking point that says what things are. It's really important, if you want to have an educated understanding, is to know the why and the how. There were key events historically that happened that brought us to this point. These were things like the voting issues, the voting right. Yeah, excuse me, the Voting Rights Act of 1968. And if not, our historian, our resident historian, can correct me on that. Nixon's Southern Strategy, Code Language, the alienation of black votes in the GOP, things like McCarthyism, what wanted to root out communism, and how Barry Goldwater in the 50s and 60s, excuse me, I want to say the 60s, saw segregation more as a states' right issue. And I spoke again, but I'm highlight again the Southern strategy. A lot of, I guess, a lot isn't really understood about what Nixon's Southern strategy really did. So I'm going to take this back a little bit when we said McCarthyism. In about 1940, there was a Red Scare in America where communism, the threat of communism was real, and to the point where even citizens became like watchdogs for the government to report other citizens. So anything that was seen as left leaning, it could be everything from union to what we call progressive politics today, was considered communism. Black movements were considered left leaning if for nothing else, is because it was a break against the establishment or the status quo. So the rise of McCarthyism started to see the alienation of blacks from what we would see mainstream Republican politics. Followed up into the 50s and 60s of Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater ran for president. I forget the year. However, he was it's argued that he wasn't necessarily a segregationist, but he felt like the issue of the day of the 1960s was segregation, and that was best left for states' rights. Now, that was a key event because at that time, had the Republicans really fought hard for desegregation, I think you would have still seen the parties look the way they look traditionally coming in Reconstruction. Blacks primarily being Republican, and mainly Southern Democrats being Southern segregationists being Democrats. But Lyndon Baines Johnson, being the political tactician that he was, saw an opportunity to gain votes. Now, it can be argued, was Lyndon Johnson racist or not? I would say he probably was a man of his day. He probably was a comfortable white man in 1955 who had dated. He had dated opinions by 2025 standards, but they were well in line with how white men of his day thought, talked, and acted. So to say was he racist or not, I don't know, and I won't make that statement here, but I will say his lobbying in the Senate and House, and his lobbying against with JFK and JFK's brother RFK, saw the Civil Rights Act of 64, excuse me, the Voting Rights Act of 64, which led to the Civil Rights Act of 65, which also set the precedent for the Civil Rights of 1968, Civil Rights Act of 1968. Those three key acts were the things that franchised blacks primarily in the South. But in doing so, it was a Democrat face to it. Now, Lyndon Johnson did say with the signature of this bill, he'll have every N word voting Democrat for the next 50 years. And he wasn't wrong. But when you look at it from the context of 1960, if you are a disenfranchised black person in the South, the party that's willing to fight for you in DC to get you the right to vote, or not even get you the right to vote because you had the right to vote, to protect your right to vote, you're going to pledge some generational loyalties to that. So that's when you started to see the shift in party. It could be argued prior to Obama's presidency, in every black household, you saw a picture of Kennedy, Jesus Christ, and Martin Luther King. Two of those people lived and existed in the 1960s. And that's to show you just to what level of power and influence the Democrat Party had over the black psyche of the 1960s.
That's some good points and some good insights, Pro. What I think the people would be best serviced with is if we kind of like take a little trip back in time and look at how we first entered into this whole voting game. Because if you are a person that was born and raised in America or came up in the American education system, then you would know that for a long period of time, black people in America were slaves, right? And the country went to war over it. And whether individuals that sided with the Southern decision to secede or not say that it wasn't about slavery, the reality is that the Civil War was about slavery. Okay, so we're not going to focus too much time on slavery. That doesn't necessarily lend to what it is that we're trying to get at today. Our thought process is how do we end up on the Democratic side of the table almost exclusively, right? And so once the Civil War was over with, right, there was a period of Reconstruction, roughly from about 1865 to 1877. And this is a point in time where troops came in and pretty much ran out all the Southern slave owners, all the Southern politicians, and that left these black enslaved people to now be called freedmen, right? So now they're free, and the question is, what do you do? We're not getting on boats and we're not sailing back to West Africa, right? So those individuals did exactly what you would expect people to do. They decided that they was going to insert themselves into politics, insert themselves into reshaping the societies in which they were now able to participate in. And you come up with approximately 2,000 black men that entered into Southern politics, okay, over the course of 11 states. And so you have these Black individuals that had a real reverence and appreciation for uh, the late um, the late President Lincoln, who was assassinated, because again, he was the one that had signed the Emancipation Proclamation. He was the one that also had signed the peace treaty at Appomattox Courthouse. And so they were free because of him, so far as they knew. And so when we entered into politics, we entered in on the Republican side, because then the grand old party was the party of Lincoln. So yes, historically we started out rocking with the Republican Party, right? And so when they started to enter into politics, they're doing exactly what politicians should do: listen to the care and concerns of his constituents, and then start implementing policies and procedures to try to reshape the surrounding culture. And so what we showed ourselves and what we showed the rest of the United States is that we were able to govern ourselves. We were able to come up with laws that set up education processes for peoples that for centuries had been punished and in some cases killed, as opposed to being able to learn how to read and write and gain literacy, right? We were able to set up policies for land distribution and land ownership so that each and every Black family got what we were talking about and heard about, that 40 acres and a mule, right? We were also able to put into play labor rights so that there was fair and equal access for men to go back out into the workforce now that they no longer had to be kept in shackles during the age of bondage. And so we were able to demonstrate to ourselves in our little small nuclear communities, and then in a broader stroke across the South, that we were able-bodied individuals that could legislate, that could build, that could come up with tax systems and come up with a way to create constructive and prosperous societies, right? So our entry into being able to vote was that of the Republican Party. And so we have to ask ourselves, what happened for us to make that switch or to make that flip? And so that's what Pro and I really, really want to focus on in this particular segment. We want to focus on how is it that we became, from the party of Lincoln, individuals that voted and put together laws and different customs that fit the needs of the Black community in those spaces, to now almost being robotic in our affiliation and our allegiance to the Democratic Party. And with that, I want to turn it back over to Pro so we can kind of dissect that a little bit.
Wow, that's a very great term used, robotic. As I stated, I want to be correct because I know the internet sleuths are going to ping me if I'm wrong. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but both of those set the tone for the Civil Rights Act of 1968. So that's pretty much a 10-year span of 1968. So let's back up a little bit. What you had 20 years before that, you had Black GIs returning from fighting in Europe and the Pacific, who, lack of a better word, made the world free, liberated the world. These Black GIs came home to a country primarily in the South where they lacked the same freedoms they went and fought and died for overseas for, and that didn't sit right. So you saw the rise of a lot of Black organizations like the Black Church, Black Freemasonry, Prince Hall Freemasonry, and Black Greek letter organizations, also known as D9. It's very important to understand or show some reverence, I believe, as a Black American to these organizations, because coming from a place of 20 to 25, it's real easy to kind of have a "I'll go at it alone" mentality in the world. But you have to remember, in the space of 1930 to 1965, there wasn't a lot of free options that blacks in society could exercise without a problem, without having a problem. So they had to have these social networks that did political action and grassroots action. There's also been talked with a lot of the Black Greek letter organizations to get back to what they originally started for, doing work in the community to build. Um, Same as Black Masonry, as well as the role of the Black Church. What happened when these rights were passed, it didn't sit well with the establishment, and you started seeing a backlash, obviously, in what we would consider polite society or white society. There was along the lines of race. Some people thought segregation as though it was bad, was an issue best left up to the state, and while others saw it as an opportunity for the federal government to have to get involved. Quick caveat on that: my father went to high school in Louisiana in 1972, and he had to go to high school with National Guard troops on the bus just to protect the safety of kids. So we're not talking about adults who disagree with other adults about pushing laws. We're talking about it was to protect the safety of high school children. That just tells you how serious this thing was. And it wasn't just merely segregation and integration, but along the lines of race in America. So as Jay had told us earlier, with the with the support from certain parties at the time, it guaranteed that there would be a safe allyship with the black community. Now, again, in 2025, it's easy to say black people aren't a monolith, but when you speak in the realm of 1960s Black America, we were pretty much a monolith.
Okay. So my question to you, just to kind of be able to pull this apart just a little bit more, is if we used to vote Republican, and then the Democrat Party had its own restructuring. It had its Dixiecrats that decided that didn't want to get on board with all of the progressive, left-leaning, liberal agendas. So they left the Democratic Party. And then individuals in the Democratic Party saw an opportunity to pretty much snipe and to pull the black vote their way. My question to you is that are we at a space where we need to really, really think about whether or not our best interests are with voting Democratic as a bloc? Or should we be voting like how our ancestors did coming out of Reconstruction, where they were voting for the best interests of their own community?
Ooh, ooh, that is a great conversation to go into our next segment in as we continue forward. I think that's one that takes some layers on that. I mean, simple answer is that we should always vote for the combined interests of the group, I guess, but then recognizing in the space of 2025, black people don't sit. We sit throughout. We have rich, middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class, and poor. And because we sit in different socioeconomic rungs on the ladder, we have access to different things and we have different opinions. And while, yes, we are all black in the eyes of the system, our socioeconomic access does afford us opportunity to buy ourselves up and buy ourselves out. So with that, I think that'd be a great topic. What you say, Jay, to get into for our next segment. I would like to touch back in our next segment on a little bit of this, the role of this Nixon Southern strategy, because I think that's really important after the Civil Rights Act of 1968 to see how there was still a concerted effort now that would further alienate black voters out of the GOP. What say you?
Yeah, no, I think that that's definitely something that most or the average person hasn't really privied themselves to, and maybe be walking and being led by some of the residuals of that particular time without even knowing its origin. So again, in this particular podcast that we're putting together, we want to be able to take a look at things at a more of a microscopic level and figure out why it is that we typically do the things that we do, and then hopefully challenge those notions and say, actually, are those what's in the best interest of us as a community? And if not, then what do we need to do in order to be able to pivot from that in a way that, regardless of where you are in the United States, if you are a part of a black community, you're put into an alignment that's more consistent with what we want to do moving forward and how we want to be seen by the United States and the world as a whole. So, Pro, we got a couple more minutes left. Let's go ahead and share with the crowd what it is that we're going to be doing in the next segment.
So the next segment, we're going to discuss the influence of these black social groups on the black vote and our black participation in the politics. Do a little bit of Martin Luther King's critique on what role the Christian church had played in the voting rights, in voting since the 1960s. We're also going to look at it from a little bit of Malcolm to understand also what role the FOI and the NOI generally played in voting since the 60s. And then we're going to follow up with how would both how would we view how would both Martin and Malcolm view the Democratic Black Caucus, its role in its utilization or underutilization, and the use of the collective vote. And we would also talk about key moments in the 60s that sort of shaped Black psyche, and has it changed now? And if so, how? And then we'll close out with, is the Democratic Party still collectively serving the needs of the Black voter?
So there you have it, folks. We got another segment coming up. Just as a reminder, we want to break these little talking segments down into something that's a little bit palatable for you guys. We understand 30 minutes is a lot of time to take out of your busy day. So if you make it through 30 minutes with us, we appreciate your support. Appreciate you rocking with us. We'll be coming back with our second segment soon. Again, it's a little bit of cosplay, a little bit of into the mentality and the mindset of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. versus that of Malcolm X. So until then, we say, make sure that you're thinking about what you're doing. Make sure you're thinking about what other people are doing. And most of all, make sure that you're doing what you think is right, not what they think is right. And with that being said, just understand we're talking to you. We're out.
Out.